Welcome to Babblecom 5. Had all gone according to plan with my recording of this particular commentary, you would have got it as I was watching it, but unfortunately my system decided not to record as I was watching it, and so I'm going to do this retrospectively instead, which is probably easier from an editing point of view, from my point of view, but I'm afraid you're not going to get me as I was doing my initial reactions to it. So The River of Souls is a Babylon 5 TV movie produced by TNT, and the back of the DVD from my DVD set says, when an archaeologist brings a stolen relic to the space station Babylon 5, the Soul Hunters, an immortal race, they're not immortal, that captures and internally imprisons souls, lays siege to the remote outpost. Now Babylon 5 is caught between two implacable forces, the Soul Hunters and the wrathful souls that have escaped their control. So, as synopses go, that really isn't massively accurate, it has to be said. This film is set, I think, about 6 months after the end of the original series. So if you think that series 1 is 58, we go 22, 58, 22, 59, 60, 61, 62. So I think this is probably, it's probably 63. I'll tell you what, let me just check that for you, because I'm sure that some people would prefer me not to be guessing. So if I have a look on River of Souls, Babylon 5. Let me see. That is decidedly unhelpful, actually, as these things go. That's really surprising, actually. The Wikipedia for River of Souls doesn't actually say the sort of in-universe year in which it was produced. Babylon 5 TV. Yeah, 2263, The River of Souls, third film. Yeah, okay. I'll go with that. So, Sheridan is off station, Garibaldi is off station, but Garibaldi actually comes back on station for a visit, so to speak, in this film. So he is actually on board, but Lockley is the station commander at this point. We do not see Sheridan or Glenn or Jakar or Malari or anyone else apart from Lockley, Zach, Colwyn, and Garibaldi, of our sort of, the regular people. We do see Franklin, but it's not Franklin, but it is his actor, basically. But it's not actually technically him as such. So what I will do is give you a more of a sort of a general kind of blow-by-blow account of what did go on, even though I'm not actually watching it live again. I'm just going to roll my slideshow as I would do normally and just sort of take you through roughly what's going on and my sort of thoughts as I was going through it and taking my various screenshots. So we start off on a planet which I don't think is ever actually identified, but it is obviously a Soul Hunter controlled planet, and there is an archaeological dig in progress being led by a chap called Dr. Bryson, who is actually played by Ian McShane. And it was funny because I was just watching John Wick last night, and he's actually in that as well. And I always remember him as being Lovejoy back in the day from a sort of a TV series where, ironically, he was an antiques dealer, as I recall, which he almost is in this film as well. So that's kind of ironic. But we've also got Martin Sheen, who plays the role of the main Soul Hunter, who we see throughout this film. And so as with some of the season 1 episodes, the sort of guest stars are well chosen, actually, and they do kind of make this, and this whole film does have the feel of a season 1 episode to me. So basically, Dr. Bryson is leading a team who uncover a Soul Hunter vault, and in this vault they come across a larger than average Soul Hunter sort of, spirit orb, if you want to call them that. In the series, in the original episode from season 1, which was entitled Soul Hunter, we see that soul hunters often carry their most prized souls in little glowing orbs and have some ability to communicate with them. And here this is something similar, but he's discovered a much larger orb than the ones we've seen before. And the soul hunters don't take kindly to grave robbers, ironically, and so they actually wipe out the rest of his team. But he gets out with this large soul orb, and he proceeds then, of course, to take it to Babylon 5, ladies and gentlemen. And Lockley has just been commenting to Colwyn that it's been quite a quiet time on the station of late, with Sheridan and Garibaldi gone, at which point she then, of course, hears the news that Garibaldi has just come back on board, because Dr. Bryson is actually working for him. And it's under the heading of one of Edgar's old black projects, and Garibaldi's delving into these black projects to discover what they are and whether or not they should carry on funding them. So he wants to have a word with Dr. Bryson, and he's chosen to meet him on the station, of course. We rapidly discover that the subplot of this film is going to be a hollow brothel, of all things, which shouldn't actually be on the station, because technically speaking that sort of thing isn't allowed. But the owner of this establishment has determined that his lease says that he can use it for any given form of entertainment, and it hasn't sort of prohibited him using it as he's using it, because the powers that be don't want it there, and they would shut him down, except he's got a lease for 6 months. And one of the users of said brothel gets injured by the full bodysuit that these guys are encouraged to wear, so they get the full experience from the brothel, because it is purely holographic in nature. So we see Dr. Bryson come on board. Garibaldi's met with Captain Lockley briefly. Lockley and Bryson seem to have a little bit in common in terms of knowing stuff about archaeology, which doesn't really bother Garibaldi, and he goes off and takes him away for his meeting with him. And Lockley says, that she might be interested to talk to the chap later on. A nice establishing shot of the station going from the sort of the rear end to the front. And we then get a scene where Garibaldi is exploring with Bryson exactly what it is that he's doing for his 2 million credits a year. And basically, he is looking into life eternal, LE. Basically, immortality. Because various races live longer than humans, some very much longer. And Bryson is trying to find a way to replicate that and understand it. And he thinks he might be onto something, but basically Garibaldi is not impressed by his progress to date and wants a review of his past 3 years of work, sharpish, in order to prevent him from losing his funding immediately. So Bryson is now faced with a race against time to figure out what he's actually pinched from the Soul Hunter world and to see whether or not it would help him. Meanwhile, one of the users of the brothel is complaining to the station powers that be that it's not licensed and it's done him harm, so can they sort it out? Lockley's got to look at it, and Colwyn's given her something to help her with her stress, which is basically a bat that says, I love you, I care for you, and stuff when you hit it, which is bizarre. So Bryson is trying to interrogate the sphere with another device that he pinched at the same time, but he hasn't really established two-way communication. He can see an image of an alien in it, but he can't do much more than that. So of course then he decides to give it more juice, and we'll see the outcome of that in due course. But meanwhile, Zack is going to have a little word in the shell-like of the brothel owner, and they exchange your typical pleasantries, and Zack basically slanders the quality of his product, but the owner is quite adamant that his lease says he can do what he wants in terms of entertainment, and Zack doesn't have a leg to stand on, and so on and so forth, and it'll take time for the station to change any of the regulations to prohibit it. And we see various of these sort of holographic ladies of the night walking around the place with the clientele. So it's not really clear exactly how this is going to resolve itself, or what the heck it's doing in a TV movie of all places. But this is TNT we're now dealing with, of course. So they do like to do things their own way. So now we see the Dear Doctor giving it some more welly, and he gets more of a sort of ironically enough, a holographic-esque image of one of the aliens up. And it becomes apparent that they're not very happy in their current situation, being trapped inside this orb, and indeed they turn red and sort of angry, and generally, and he realizes that they are actually alive, that he realizes it's not actually recording inside the orb, but he actually falls asleep, which turns out to be a bad idea, because he knocks the orb into the communications device he was using, which kind of hotwires it, and that then allows the orb to broadcast more widely, because it's got more access to the station's systems. So it's not clear how that's going to resolve itself. And meanwhile, Lockley is trying to eat her breakfast, and then she gets jumped on by a lawyer for the brothel, who serves her with various papers alleging things like defamation and basically saying that that the station is acting in restraint of trade by telling the brothel owner that he can't continue as he is. Garibaldi goes to see the dear doctor to chivvy him along, because he's been promised a report on his activities and he hasn't had it. And the doctor seems to be pretty out there, because basically he's saying that his money doesn't matter anymore. It's not what's important, and his work is all that matters, and the money isn't relevant anymore. And he basically comes across as being fairly moderately unhinged at this point. So Garibaldi is none too impressed, because obviously Garibaldi is used to getting what he expects to get now that he's in charge of a big corporation. Meanwhile, Zack and Lockley are debating what to do about the various subpoenas that they've been issued with, one of which is aimed at Lockley personally, apparently, strangely. And in the course of this conversation, they get a report that some more ships are coming through the jump gate, and the ship turns out to be a Soul Hunter ship. And the orb alerts Dr. Bryson to the fact that the ship has arrived, because it can sense what it is. And Garibaldi notes to Lockley that he knows what it is, even if she doesn't, and has had some dealings with him in the past. So he basically gets drafted in to assist with the current situation, and the Soul Hunter actually comes on board straight away. The Soul Hunter immediately IDs the fact that it's Bryson he wants to talk to, because it's apparent that they've actually captured the souls of his team. So because the Soul Hunter can interrogate the soul orb, and he can therefore interrogate the team, and basically he says, I need to speak to Bryson. He's not there for any of them, because normally Soul Hunters only turn up when someone is close to death, or someone important is about to die, so they can collect their souls. And that's been established in season 1 and elsewhere, when they tried to collect the soul of Ducat when he died. So Garibaldi, of course, is less than impressed to hear that it's his employee that they're after. But it transpires that the Soul Hunters once saved, in their terms, an entire planet by capturing the souls of everyone on it, and it's apparently it's a massive endeavour for them. They've only ever done it a couple of times, but so there are actually 1 billion souls inside the soul orb that Bryson stole from them, and this is why they are so keen to get it back, because it's a major piece of one of their sort of archival whisper galleries. Now, there were various debates then held by Lockley and Garibaldi and Zack as to whether or not the Soul Hunters have any right to do this, whether or not they're actually souls rather than just memories, and whether or not, in fact, if there is a heaven, then that must be the equivalent of hell, if those souls are actually still aware of where they are and unable to escape from it. And it becomes apparent that the longer that the dear doctor is in contact with the orb, the more influence it's going to have over him, and so these 1 billion souls are going to be pretty powerful, because there are so many of them. So they're going to be able to encourage him to do stuff on their behalf, basically. The lawyer, meanwhile, is saying that Lockley is stalling, because she does have far more important things to be doing just at the minute. So she's not too impressed by the fact that he keeps badgering her. So we see that Dr. Bryson is being encouraged to give even more power and sort of direct access to the ship's systems, to the station systems rather, to the orb through the communications device. And we see that it's able then to extend its reach out into various systems. And one chap was about to get jiggy with it in the hollow brothel when his hologram is actually taken over by I think it's the Ralgarians, they're called, the Ralgans, something like that. and they then sort of take control of a couple of holograms, and we see them then briefly turn into their actual normal physical forms. So the guy leaves because he hadn't ordered a threesome and isn't really up for what's going on. And then we see that Captain Lockley has been turned into one of the Ladies of the Night holograms, with very little left to the imagination. And the guy says, "Can I have her instead?" And that will then become a bit of a theme, of course, inevitably. Again, TNT. Then we see a sort of Grim Reaper style version of one of the aliens, and that sort of approaches a guy in a corridor as a hologram. And it turns out that all of the hologram's range should normally be very short-lived, because Zach's been accosted by one, and Lockley dismissed that as being a hologram, because you have to have lots of equipment for Earth holograms. But because the aliens are boosting the power, they're able to broadcast the holograms more widely. And the Soul Hunter goes to find Lockley and sort of speak with her, and Lockley sort of asks him, well, what are the souls able to do whilst they're inside the orbs? And he basically says, well, they just preserve them. They do interact with them on occasion, but not massively. And she says that does sound a lot like hell to her. And it's quite interesting because she's making very sort of derogatory remarks about their cultural beliefs in doing that. So you wouldn't really expect that from a sort of politics kind of diplomacy point of view, but that's what she does. But then she actually decides to put herself in between the Soul Hunter and the enraged souls who have managed to break free and get into the ship's systems. And he's amazed by this, because normally where he's used to being treated extremely poorly when he turns up. And we see that Lockley does actually flatline. But as she flatlines, we see her standing next to her own body. And then she actually seems to sort of sink through the decks of the station. But then she actually appears in a recreation of the alien's homeworld. And then Stephen Franklin, sporting a slightly different accent to normal, turns up to speak to her. And it's not him, it's just what her mind has conjured an image of to speak to her. And he explains that there are actually two factions inside the orb. So there are those who have gone basically mad because they've been in there for 10,000 years, unable to escape. And he explains what actually happened was not that they were facing a mass extinction event, as we might have assumed, but actually that their race was on the verge of ascending, in effect, and becoming energy beings, so reaching the next stage of the revolution. And the Soul Hunters mistook that for them dying. So they actually captured them just as they were about to become energy beings. And some of them have been driven mad by this, but his faction is trying to hold it together and keep things together. And he says that he manipulated the energy blast from the mad ones to try and save Lockley and just knock her out for a short period so that he could communicate with her. And now as she's coming back, we discover that an armada of Soul Hunter ships are coming in because they don't like how long it's taking to get the orb back, and they want to force the situation. And the Soul Hunter apologises to her and doesn't believe her at first when she explains what she saw, but her description of the planet and its planetary sort of system convinces him that actually she did get inside the orb. And when he learns that they captured them at the point of their ascendance, he realises that they made a massive mistake, and it wasn't something that Soul Hunters should have done. But their blind faith in their own abilities means that they haven't questioned whether or not they were in the right for taking the souls at that particular point. And Lockley draws the analogy as with Vorlons being energy beings, obviously that being exactly what she thinks has happened here. So the Soul Hunter undertakes to go and speak to his people and try and get them to hold off their attack, because he says their ships are designed to burn through the hulls of other ships and board them in order to be able to take souls, and only the Minbari have ever managed to stop them when they stopped them taking Ducat's soul, because if they act en masse, they're nigh on unstoppable. So he says he'll do what he can, but meanwhile it's apparent that there are sort of various energy drains happening, and that the brothel owner accosts Garibaldi and Zack when they're investigating the death of the guy who was frightened to death by the Reaver alien. And it turns out that the aliens are sort of gathering in the hollow brothel to make use of its systems, and indeed they're using Lockley's image to sort of attract attention to themselves. So Lockley, Garibaldi, and Zack go and watch a fake Lockley talking to the various people to say that they're basically intending to take out the soul hunters who have gathered and the station in order to end both their own suffering and take revenge on the soul hunters for imprisoning them. So Lockley goes to check on what's what, because they notice there's a power drain that affects the station but not the holographic images, and she realizes that the aliens are no longer in the holograms. They were just there to distract her and the others from what was actually going on. And what's actually going on is that they want to blow up the station, and in blowing up the station, because the soul hunter ships are so close to it, they hope to take out the soul hunter ships into the process and thusly get their revenge and get their peace. So obviously they need to do something about this. But they realise that the other soul hunters aren't going to hold off, because the soul hunter who she's been speaking with is quite young by their race's standards, and the others just don't really sort of trust him to figure out the situation properly. Meanwhile, it's in down in Grave 4, Dr. Bryson is sort of resting with the orb hovering over his lap, and is surrounded by a cylindrical shield that's PPG proof basically. And Garibaldi's attempts to talk him down fail miserably because he's not really in the listening mood. And so the fusion reactor is going to continue to its overload, and Dr. Bryson is not going to snap out of it. So Garibaldi takes cover as it has a crack at him. And then it's left to the Soul Hunter to try and make a difference at this point, because the Soul Hunter realises that they've made a mistake. And Lockley's convinced him that actually what they do full stop is probably wrong. So he goes to try and speak to the aliens and explains to them that he's made a mistake, and he's prepared to sacrifice his soul to go into the orb to convince them that they will do their best to try and set things right and try and let them have some freedom intermittently until they can find a way to permanently free them from the orb in a way that it won't destroy them. And they do seem to trust him, although he does die as a result, because his soul is basically ripped from him and put into the orb so that they can interrogate him. But they also let Dr. Bryson go, and although he falls unconscious, the orb does deactivate, and the controls return to the station, and the soul hunters don't breach the station. So all of that sort of works out largely for the best, which is good. But Lockley does, in another stunningly diplomatic statement, warns the soul hunters that they will become the hunted if they don't do what the young soul hunter promised that they would do to try and set the alien race free. And he then sees Lockley inside the orb as the sort of person who he wants to see inside the orb, which is nice. So the soul hunters take their leave with the orb to go and work on a solution, which may take quite a long time, but at least they seem to be taking doing what they said they would do, and maybe they'll actually end up not being soul hunters anymore. It's possible. Or at least perhaps they'll try and determine whether or not they should actually ask a race before they take their souls, rather than just assuming that they should. And we finally end on a bit of sort of a lawyer gag, because the lawyer who's been trying to subpoena her and cause her hassle throughout the movie is reminded that because she blew up the hollow brothel in an attempt to distract the aliens and prevent them from knowing that they'd figured out what was going on, and because her image was being used as one of the hollow brothel images against her wishes, she basically tells him to do one, and he doesn't have much choice but to accept that she's won, and he has to pack his bags and go. And she gifts him the sort of the love bat that she was given by Colwyn, reprogrammed to take the piss out of him, basically. So that was River of Souls at high speed. Did I like it? Yes and no. It felt like me very much like a season 1 episode that was stretched out, in the sense that it didn't have any sort of arc elements to it, because obviously post season 5 we're kind of beyond that point. And this was very much, it just felt like sort of a lot of the hollow brothel stuff was kind of just padding, a bit random. I think it was probably to do with TNT's influence into it at this point. I think there is a commentary on this DVD which I haven't listened to yet, but I suspect that JMS would probably make some commentary around stuff that he was probably required to add in rather than it being his choice, perhaps. I don't know how Tracy Scoggins would have felt about this episode, because it feels decidedly sexist towards her in some places, but a bit weird like that. And it's not generally a direction that Babylon 5 feels a need to go in, unless there's a really good reason for it. And I guess it was part of the plot line, because yes, the holographs did tie in with the sort of overpowered souls kind of concept, because these souls, because they were close to ascending or becoming energy beings, they do have more power than the souls that soul hunters are typically used to dealing with, and that's part of the plot point on the episode. But it just feels like there wasn't really enough plot to feed a full hour and a half's worth of movie here. It's very much an extended, it feels more like an extended single episode than an actual 2-part episode even. So it's not like it's even like Voice in the Wilderness really. But that being said, the quality of the effects is very, very good. They do a good sort of establishing sequence at the outset of the dig site and sort of moving through tunnels there. And the actual effects for the aliens moving through the systems and so on are not bad, and on a par, I would say, with what we see in season 5 normally, actually. There's an interesting point where Lockley sort of temporarily dies, because we've seen a telepath. I think we saw Lita, seeing someone pass over to the other side, and it wasn't portrayed in quite this way, but that was permanent, whereas this was kind of temporary. And because there was a soul hunter and alien influence element in it, that's probably why we see it differently as it's portrayed here. I think Ian McShane's performance is good as far as it goes, as was Martin Sheen's. I think they both sort of did what they needed to do perfectly well to sort of help sell it. And I think that's what makes me think of season 1, because in season 1 there are a lot of very good guest spots where, had the guest actors not been good, the episode itself would have fallen a lot flatter. But I think they did well with the River of Souls here to actually include people of their caliber, just to sort of lift it a bit. It just feels a little bit cheesy, a little bit forced in places for something that is supposed to be an out and out movie, as against an extended episode. I think that's just where it just doesn't work for me personally. I do like the exploration of the soul hunters, because it does go into a bit more detail about them, and it's interesting that their souls don't get gathered as such, because that's not kind of what they're there for. They see their role very much as being the preservers rather than the ones to be preserved. So they obviously don't have a massive sort of ego in that sense. They're just there to try and do what they perceive to be the right thing. But it is interesting because it is very much their perception rather than perhaps what other races would consider to be the right thing. So although Lockley is less than diplomatic when she explores that with him, I think they're used to having quite a negative attitude thrown at them for this very reason. So it doesn't particularly take umbrage with that as a concept. So whether or not there would actually be soul hunters in the future off the back of this encounter, I don't know, because he does seem to suggest that they might rethink their way of doing things off the back of this, because he said that it's basically their arrogance that assumes that there's no need to investigate whether or not they've done the right thing, because they just assume that what they are doing is the right thing just through sort of sheer faith in their own sort of ways, basically. So if they do actually do what they're supposed to do, as Lockley encourages them to do, then you should, in theory, see a change in the behaviour of soul hunters. But I don't know if that's really sort of resolved as a concept in any of the extended universe works at all, or whether or not we just kind of assume that is what's going to happen off the back of all this. I don't know, but it's certainly an interesting one to ponder. And this does tie back into other things that we've seen in the series, where we know that the Minbari were the only ones who were actually successful in preventing a soul from being taken, because they did not want their souls culturally, racially being diminished by being taken by soul hunters. It was an absolute no-no for them. So no matter how hard the soul hunters tried, they would be absolutely stonewalled by the Minbari, who would much rather that their souls just pass into the beyond rather than being captured. So that was again sort of reinforced as a sort of established lore point in this film. And at the end of the day, this film is lore. So whatever you think of its quality compared to everything else, it is part of the lore of the series. Now, that's all I've really got to say about this one. The only other one that I've still got left to cover now is A Call to Arms, which it comes later in the Babylon 5 timeline, and it comes before the series Crusade. And I'm not quite sure if it's before. You may not have heard of it, but there is another film called, it's actually in theory it was a pilot for a series called The Legend of the Rangers, and that would have been set apparently a little bit before A Call to Arms. So I have actually just ordered that. Not many people like it, but I will probably cover it for sake of completion. I've also got the Lost Tales I can cover as well, and I think at that point I will have covered everything that's actually there on film. I've also ordered all the books, so all the sort of in-series set books, if you like. I had to stop because there were lots of other bits and bobs of books I could have got, and I haven't gone that far because that would have gotten really expensive. And some of them are very hard to find, but touch wood, I should be getting them all. So I will have a look at those as and when they've arrived, and sort of run you through some of those as well. Not all of them are canon, but some of them are. So in order to actually have explored the canon in full, I never had them at the time when they came out originally, because I just didn't have the funds to get them at that point. So they will be brand new to me. I know roughly what's in some of them, but not in detail. So that might be a bit of a project for me for next year. But that is where I'm sort of landing. I might even get to do it. I might try and do a Call to Arms tomorrow. I don't know. I'll see how I feel tomorrow. See what happens. But I will definitely just sort of try and round things off over the course of the next year. And I think with that, I shall leave you for now. So thanks for listening, and I will see you again soon. Cheers.